Well, let's bring in someone that knows a little bit about deals like this. Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, and author of Trump and the American Future. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being with us. You know, we've got a deal. It looks like it. Looks like the vote will happen soon. But it also looks a lot like what could have been accomplished, say, months ago. So how did we get here?
Well, I think two things. I think one was that Pelosi did not want to do anything which would help elect Donald Trump. And so she thought it was to her political advantage not to pass this before the presidential election. And second, the Democrats were desperate to get additional money for their government employee union allies in the big states, and they couldn't get it, and in the end they gave up. I suspect they'll try to come back under Biden, and that's why they're so desperate, for example, in Georgia, because if the Republicans win those two seats, it's very unlikely that tax money is going to go from Georgia to prop up New York or California or Illinois. On the other hand, if the Democrats win in Georgia, that I think is very likely. And the Mayor de Blasio indicated this when he said he wouldn't introduce his city budget for New York until after the Georgia election because he wanted to wait and see whether or not he could get more money out of Washington. It was that straightforward. So I think that's part of what's going on. The other thing people need to recognize, even at $900 billion, they couldn't say anything nice about each other because the gap is that wide. The disagreements are that deep. And this is not going to go away. This was never a personality thing about Donald Trump. This is a fundamental division in America about what kind of country we are.
I just keep thinking how there's not enough coal to account for all of the hill. But, Speaker, to your first point, we want to show you a sound clip of Speaker Pelosi yesterday, and then something that she said on December 4th. And I think what's so hard to stomach for the average American watching their small business close, that it's so hard to stomach the audacity, the transparency of these politicians who are politicizing exactly those reasons that you just stated, which is their strategy above Americans' needs. Take a listen, then we'll get your feedback.
What took so long is because we could not get our Republican colleagues to crush the virus. Why would they not want to invest in the science that has told us so importantly that it required testing, tracing, treatment, separation, sanitation? Joe Biden committed to ending and crushing the virus. What was then before was not more of this. This has simplicity. It's what we've had in our bills. It's for a shorter period of time, but that's okay now because we have a new president.
Your thoughts?
Well, look, I think she was, frankly, being pretty candid. She's counting on coming back in January or February or March with a President Biden applying pressure. The problem she's got is that Kevin McCarthy's strategy of recruiting broadly and running on a positive commitment to America has cut her margin in the House dramatically. And if the Republicans do keep the two seats in Georgia, they're not going to get anything like she wants through the Congress, let alone signed by President Biden. But there's a deeper part of this. The Democrats are so in debt to the government employee unions that if they have to crush small business in order to take care of their government employee allies, that's what they're going to do. That's what you see in California. That's what you see in New York. That's what you see in Illinois. This is a clear pattern where the Democrats are desperate to get money for their government union allies and are willing to punish any business that gets in their way.
And that's what that whole climate push is about. He talks about bringing good union jobs to climate research and transitioning off fossil fuels. I also wonder, when it comes to this package, what about landlords? They're not terrible people. They took out big loans in order to buy buildings and then rent to other people. Why do they now all of a sudden they're prevented from getting rent because people are out of money because of these politicians? Are the banks going to let the landlords off the hook? Do people understand how this works? So I'd like to see that. This is something I'd like to point out. This did not happen from leadership, Mr. Speaker. This happened because Manchin got together with, I guess, Chris Coons and Murkowski and Collins and then Romney. This started from the middle up. Does that matter? Well,
I think it matters some, and I think we'll see how often they can do that. The challenge that Manchin's going to find is that he's in a very, very left-wing caucus, and that caucus wants to do things that, frankly, West Virginians don't want. So it'll be interesting to watch and see how that plays out. But the deeper point here is that once the presidential election was over, this was always going to be easy to get done. They could have done this 6 weeks ago. They could have saved an immense amount of pain for small businesses and for workers. But Pelosi and the Democrats were determined to not allow Donald Trump to have any victories. And, she talks about investing in science. We just had the most extraordinary achievements in vaccines in history. They were all done by President Trump. They were all laughed at when he said it could be done. And I think that he just said that in the long run, history will record that President Trump, in fact, aggressively used science combined with entrepreneurial businesses to get breakthroughs that people thought was impossible.
Mr. Speaker, you know a lot about committee assignments and how people land on certain committees. Well, there's been a lot of questions about Representative Eric Swalwell after he's known to have a relationship with a Chinese spy. That was revealed. The spy fled. He's still on the committee and has been for, I believe, almost 8 years. We know about this all now, and Kevin McCarthy and others on the Select Intel Committee were able to receive a briefing from the FBI about Swalwell and those connections. Here's a portion of what Representative McCarthy said after being in on that FBI briefing.
It was a very thorough briefing. No one that was in that room could walk out and say Eric Swalwell should be on the Intel Committee. And the challenge here is the leaders of both parties are the only people who select to go on the Intel Committee. That is why today, Maria, what I'm going to request, that every single member on the House Intelligence Committee gets the exact same briefing from the FBI that I did. Because if this individual is sitting on this committee, Eric Swalwell, they've got to know the background of what has gone on.
Mr. Speaker, is this something that reaches outside of the conservative sphere, which is really the only place talking about it in some ways right now? The New York Times hasn't spent one drop of ink even talking about the story. Does Nancy Pelosi have a tough choice in front of her, or will she skate on this, keeping him on the committee?
Now, look, I think that this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. You have to start with the fact that the Chinese communist dictatorship is our most dangerous competitor, has a massive program underway to penetrate the United States, from universities to spies to economic advantage. It's an amazingly powerful effort on their part. And Swalwell is part of that. I mean, frankly, having been Speaker, having chosen people to be on the Intelligence Committee, I wonder what Swalwell's holding over Nancy Pelosi. Because remember, she appoints him to this committee after the FBI has briefed her. It's not like he was on the committee and she had to take him off. She never had to put him on. And so you have to ask yourself, why would the Speaker of the House pick somebody who the FBI said had a long relationship with a Chinese spy? I mean, this is just sort of crazy. And I think it's part of, as the country gets more and more aware of how dangerous China is, things like this are going to become utterly unacceptable, just as Hunter Biden's business dealings in China are going to become totally unacceptable. Just as, by the way, Senator Feinstein having a driver who was a Chinese spy for, I think, 20 years was unacceptable. She was head of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. And the Democrats just seem to be oblivious to protecting the United States from the Chinese communist dictatorship, and Swalwell's just one example out of many.
Mr. Speaker, we wanted to get your thoughts as well on another committee, that is the Energy and Commerce, of which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will not be a member. Now, there was a 46-13 vote against her, and the question is, was this revenge of the Democrat moderates?
Well, I think what it reflects is that she went around thinking that she had somehow been elected as a legislative goddess, and she attacked her fellow Democrats. She ran people in primaries. She was a constant noisy gadfly, and that's all looks terrific on television. It looks terrific, in social media. But legislative bodies are very, very tough. And inside a legislative body, they have ways of getting even. And I think, frankly, it was partly that she's too radical, but mostly that she's just too nasty. And I think that this was a personal repudiation of her. And I'll be curious to see how she deals with it. I mean, 46-13 is not a good sign for her future career. And I suspect has weakened her dramatically. I know, at least I think, that she really wanted to run against Schumer in the Democratic primary for the Senate in 2022. I think this repudiation will make it very hard for her to put together a Senate primary against the minority leader in the Senate.
All right, let's talk about another area of your expertise, and that is Georgia. More than 1.3 million Georgians have already voted in the Senate runoff elections. According to Nate Silver of 538, and he says, according to him, that he's been very accurate in Georgia, it's basically two flat-footed ties. What's going to be the difference here as the president says he'll go down again to help out?
Well, I think the difference is, first of all, turnout. And second, the degree to which the message about Raphael Warnock's extraordinary radicalism reaches the average Georgian. The polls I've seen that I trust, which have been more accurate, frankly, than Silver, would indicate that we're ahead by 2 or 3 points in both races. Ossoff is very radical. Warnock is the most radical candidate nominated by a major party in my lifetime. But also I get a sense, talking to people who are on the ground, that the turnout is actually better for us than it was in November. And that we just have to keep pushing and make sure, my message to conservatives is simple. Email, call, tweet, whatever, every person you know in Georgia, and make sure they vote. If every conservative votes, we will win these 2 seats. And as we were just talking about, that this is decisive. This is the most important runoff in American history. It will decide who runs the Senate. And the difference between Schumer and Pelosi trying to pay off the government unions everywhere in the country and having a Mitch McConnell in the Senate and a Kevin McCarthy in the House, the difference in the direction of the country will be dramatic depending on the outcome of the Georgia runoff.
Yeah, it's impossible to overstate it. I just want to add this. Chad Pergram just sent us this. He's our Capitol Hill reporter. He's best in the business. He says, here we go again. We still don't have the bill text to this coronavirus bill. The Rules Committee may not meet until 10 o'clock Eastern. This delays the timing and passage of the bill in the House and the Senate. So they still don't have their act together, even though they said they had the framework of a deal on Friday. Just real quick on this.
If we were serious, which we're not, you'd have to have a bill of this size with this much money would have to take a week or more. I mean, members are going to vote blindly. They'll have no idea what they're voting for. I mean, if you're leadership, that's terrific because you get to put in whatever you want to. But if you're an average member, you just got run over by the system, and you'll have no knowledge of what's in this bill. And for some lobbyists, it is, the great payday. I mean, they'll slip some paragraph in there that'll justify them getting paid by their clients for the next 20 years. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible way to legislate, and something which I deeply disapprove of, and I think is a real, the leaders like it. The fewer people in the room, the more powerful the leaders are, the more they can do. But it's a really bad way to run a legislative body.
Newt Gingrich, thank you.
So true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.